They say some roads are forgotten for a reason. Some towns are erased not by time but by choice, hidden on no map, mentioned in no records, places where something went wrong long ago and no one dares to speak of it anymore. I would have never believed any of it if it hadn't been for that one drive. That one stormy night when I ignored the warning on my GPS and took the old road through Hollow Creek. It started with the rain, thick and heavy, like it wasn't falling but slamming down from the sky. My windshield wipers couldn't keep up and the road ahead was a blur of black and lightning flashes. I had left the main highway by accident after a detour sign pushed me off course, and before I knew it, I was miles from anywhere familiar. Trees arched over the narrow road like claws, and every now and then I swore I saw something move between them. Not animals, not deer or anything like that, just shapes, too fast to follow, too tall to explain. My fuel was running low, my phone had no signal, and the only thing keeping me sane was the dim yellow glow of my headlights cutting through the storm. Then I saw it, an old wooden sign just ahead, crooked and half fallen. It read "Welcome to Hollow Creek," the letters nearly swallowed by moss and time. It didn't look like much of a town, just a few houses I could barely make out through the trees and fog, but I needed shelter, gas, anything. As I rolled past the sign, I noticed something strange. The rain stopped instantly like I had driven through an invisible wall. Everything was dry. Even my windshield cleared itself in seconds. The storm still raged behind me, but not a drop crossed into Hollow Creek. My instincts screamed to turn around, but my car kept moving forward like something else had taken control. The road narrowed further until the trees pressed right up against the edges, and that's when I saw the girl. She was standing by the side of the road, maybe 7 or 8 years old, barefoot, wearing a faded white dress soaked at the hem. Her hair hung over her face, and in her hands she held a broken doll. I slowed down, rolled the window down just a crack, and called out to her. But she didn't move, didn't even flinch. I asked if she was all right, if she needed help. And then, without lifting her head, she said one thing in a voice that was too old for her body. "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could respond, the headlights flickered and the engine stalled. Everything went black. I turned the key again and again, but nothing worked. Then the radio came on by itself, static at first, then a voice barely audible through the crackling. It was a man's voice repeating the same phrase over and over. "Leave before the sun sets." I stepped out of the car. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, like something had pulled all the warmth from the world. The girl was gone, not a trace of her left on the muddy path. I looked around. Not a single bird chirped, not a breeze moved through the trees. It was like the town itself was holding its breath. I saw a light in the distance, a dim lantern glow coming from what looked like a church at the center of the village. I thought maybe someone there could help. As I walked, the gravel cracked beneath my feet in a rhythm that sounded like footsteps trailing mine. I turned around more than once, but nothing was there, just the empty road, the dead trees, and that sound, always just a few steps behind me. The church door creaked open as I approached, and inside I found rows of broken pews, a crumbling altar, and a single candle burning on the floor in front of a mirror taller than any I'd ever seen. The mirror was wrong. Its surface wasn't reflective, it rippled like water, and standing in front of it was a man, or something that looked like one, tall, thin, wearing old torn clothes that looked soaked in something dark. He didn't look at me, just stared into the mirror as if waiting for something. I asked him if he lived here, if he could help me, and slowly he turned his head toward me. His eyes were gone, just hollow holes that seemed to stretch forever, and he whispered, "The road out disappeared the moment you entered. No one leaves Hollow Creek." I ran, my heartbeat pounding like thunder in my ears. I didn't stop until I was back at the car, still dead, still useless. I tried calling emergency services again, still no signal. I screamed, hit the steering wheel, begged for this to be a dream. Then I looked up and saw something in the rearview mirror, the girl again, standing just behind the car, staring straight into the glass with her eyes wide and dark. And this time she was smiling, not like a child, but like something pretending to be one. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there in the front seat staring at her through the mirror, afraid to turn around, because something deep inside me whispered that if I saw her with my own eyes, something would break, something inside my head would snap, and I'd never be the same again. So I shut my eyes and started counting, hoping that when I opened them, she would be gone and I could pretend none of this had happened. But when I reached 10 and finally looked, she was no longer in the mirror. She was In the passenger seat beside me, her body, still her face, turned toward mine, and though her eyes were sewn shut like old cloth, her head tilted and her mouth open, not to speak, but to scream. It wasn't a scream you hear with your ears, it was one that fills your whole body, a scream that comes from inside your skull and rattles every bone in your spine, and I blacked out. I don't even remember falling asleep or losing consciousness, but when I came to, I was lying on the gravel outside the car, and the sky above me was red, not like a sunset, but like it was bleeding, like something in the heavens had been torn open and the light was leaking through. Everything around me was darker. The trees looked twisted, the ground was cracked like it had been scorched, and in the distance I heard the tolling of a bell, deep and slow and hollow. I walked without thinking toward the sound, my feet moving like they were pulled by something not of my own, while the bell rang with each step, echoing through the bones of the village, and I passed houses now that weren't there before, small wooden homes with their doors half open, and inside I saw shadows move, not people, not animals, just shadows slinking across the floor with no source, with no light behind them. I didn't stop, I didn't look inside for more than a second, I just kept walking as the bell pulled me closer to the center of Hollow Creek. When I reached the bell tower, I found the church again, but now it looked different, older, as if centuries had passed in minutes. The wood was black and rotting, the windows shattered, the candle that once flickered inside was now dozens lining the walls, and in the center stood a woman dressed in black, her face covered by a lace veil, and in her arms was the same doll the girl had carried, its head twisted, its arms limp, its eyes still sewn shut, and she looked at me, though I couldn't see her face. I felt her gaze pierce through me. She asked me if I remembered, and I told her I didn't. I had never been here, I was just passing through. And she stepped forward slowly, her voice soft but heavy like it came from beneath the earth, and said, "No one just passes through Hollow Creek, they only come back." And that's when I felt it again, the memory, the flicker of something buried deep from childhood, the smell of wet earth, the sound of whispering lullabies, and a face not fully formed in my mind, but familiar, like someone I once knew but tried to forget. I asked her who she was, and she said she was the keeper of the gate, and I had opened the gate, and now it could not be closed. She held out the doll to me and told me to take it, to remember, and as my hand touched the fabric, I saw it all, a flash of memory, not a dream, but real. I was a child in this place, running, laughing, chasing something through the woods, and behind me was that same girl with the sewn eyes, her hand in mine, like we were playing, and the adults around us watched with blank expressions and bleeding eyes, and in the distance someone was crying, not out of fear, but out of hunger. I dropped the doll and stumbled back, the memory shaking me to the core, and the woman pointed toward the road behind the church and told me to leave while I still could, but her voice cracked on the last word like she knew it was already too late, and I turned and ran faster than I ever had before down that road, which twisted and turned and felt like it looped back on itself, and the trees leaned in close, their branches brushing my shoulders like fingers trying to pull me back. The road ended at a river, black as ink, with no sound, no current, just still like a sheet of glass. And there was a bridge, old and rickety, stretching across, and standing at the far side was a man holding a lantern, his face hidden under a wide brim hat. He didn't move, didn't speak, just lifted the lantern higher like an invitation or a warning. I stepped onto the bridge, and it groaned beneath my weight, each step creaking louder than the last, until it felt like the wood would snap and send me plunging into the black water below. Halfway across, I looked down and saw faces in the water, not reflections, not illusions, but actual faces, hundreds of them, pale and staring, mouths open as if screaming beneath the surface, and among them I saw my own, and I almost turned back, but the man lifted the lantern again, and I kept going, because something told me stopping would be worse than whatever waited ahead. And when I reached the other side, the man turned and began walking down a narrow path through the trees, and I followed because I had no other choice. He led me to a cabin hidden deep in the woods, small and quiet and somehow untouched by the rot that consumed the rest of the town, and he opened the door without a word, and inside was warmth, a fire crackling, a chair waiting, and photographs on the wall, all of them in black and white. But one caught my eye, a picture of a child holding a doll, the same doll with the sewn eyes, and the child was me, younger, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and beside me stood the veiled woman, her hand on my shoulder. I asked the man what this meant. How could I have been here before? How could I not remember? And he finally spoke, his voice rough like gravel, and said some memories don't belong to the living and some debts are paid in flesh, and that I had left something behind when I first came here as a child, something important, something the town would never let go. and that by returning, I had woken it all back up. I had stirred the sleeping things beneath the soil, and now they would never rest again. I wanted to scream, I wanted to demand answers, but something about the way the man looked at me silenced every word in my throat. His eyes were gray, not with age, but with something older, like stone, like ash, like they had watched too many lives pass and too many deaths unfold. He pointed to the fireplace and told me to sit, and I did not because I trusted him, but because I felt like I had no will of my own anymore, like everything I did from that point on was being pulled by strings that had been tied to me long before I knew they were there. The fire crackled low and steady, and in its glow I saw things move in the corners of the room, not shadows, not insects, but something else, things without shapes that slithered and breathed and whispered just under the floorboards, just behind the walls, and the man said they were always there, the watchers, the feeders, the things that came to this place when the first stone of the town was laid. He told me Hollow Creek was never built, it was grown, and whatever grew it didn't grow it for people. He told me about the settlers who came here centuries ago, people who fled something worse, people who made a bargain they shouldn't have made, people who gave up names and memories and lives in exchange for safety, and how the town never forgot the blood that sealed that deal. He said the children born here were not quite children, and the elders were not quite old, and the ground had been salted with tears and silence for generations, and I felt sick, like my stomach was full of moths, like my bones were turning hollow, like my name was slipping from my own mouth. I stood up and told him I was leaving. I didn't care what the cost was. I didn't care if I had to walk into the river and never come out. I would not stay in this nightmare. And he didn't stop me. He just said softly, "You can try, but you won't be the same when you get out if you get out." And that sentence stuck in my head like a splinter lodged deep in my brain as I pushed open the cabin door and stepped back into the forest. But the forest was different now. The trees were closer. The sky above had turned a thick brown like dried blood, and the ground pulsed beneath my feet like a heartbeat, like the whole world had turned into something alive and angry and aware of me. And as I ran, I saw faces in the bark, screaming not with mouths, but with eyes and hands clawing from beneath the roots and branches that swayed without wind, like they were reaching for me, calling me back, like I had something that belonged to them. I broke through the trees into what should have been the road, but it wasn't the same road anymore. It was cracked and twisted and lined with crooked lampposts that flickered with that same yellow hue from the mirror dreams. And the girl was there again, standing in the middle of the road, her doll hanging limp from one hand, her sewn eyes somehow fixed on me. And this time she didn't speak. She just opened her mouth wide and wider until the skin on her cheeks tore, and something crawled out of her throat, something black and thin and wet, and it dragged itself across the road toward me, leaving a trail of rot, and I ran. I didn't look back, I didn't stop, I just ran with no direction, just away, but every step took me back to the church, back to the graveyard that hadn't been there before, and the graves were open, not dug up, but like something had clawed its way out, and on every headstone was my name carved over and over with different dates, different years, some in the past, some that hadn't come yet. And in the distance, I heard the bell again, tolling slow and deep, and the air was filled with the sound of breathing, but not from lungs. It was the kind of breath that comes from soil that has been disturbed. I screamed into the sky, I screamed at the town, I screamed at the house, at the road, at the trees, at the name I couldn't remember, and the one I couldn't forget. And the wind howled back, and something answered from deep below the ground, something that had been waiting for me since I was a child, since the first time I came to Hollow Creek, and left a piece of myself behind, something that had finally woken up and wanted me whole again. I fell to my knees in front of the largest grave, a stone so tall it cast a shadow that stretched across the entire field, and carved on it in letters so fresh they dripped was the phrase "Welcome Home," and beneath it my face, carved not like a photo, not like a sketch, but like something had pressed my face into the stone itself and captured my expression of terror, frozen forever in gray. And I reached out to touch it and felt warmth, like skin, like breath, and the ground split open. Hands not human pulled me down, fingers cold and too long, their nails digging into my arms, into my legs, and I screamed as dirt filled my mouth and eyes, and I sank into the grave, into the dark, into something that was not a coffin but a room. And when I opened my eyes, I was sitting in a chair in the same cabin with the same fire burning low and the same man staring at me, and I was back where I started, except something was different. I was holding the doll now, and its eyes were no longer sewn shut. The doll felt warm in my hands, not like cloth or cotton, but like skin, like it was breathing faintly, its chest rising and falling so slowly I could barely notice it, and I wanted to drop it, I wanted to throw it into the fire, but my hands wouldn't let go, like they were locked, like the doll had wrapped something invisible around my fingers, and the man just stared at me with those stone-colored eyes and said softly, "Now you remember, don't you?" And I didn't want to say it, but I did. I nodded slowly and whispered yes, because it had all come back, not all at once, but piece by piece, like puzzle fragments drifting up from black water, memories I had buried, or maybe they had been buried for me. I saw myself younger, maybe 6, maybe 7, running barefoot through those woods, the same woods I had just come out of, except back then they weren't dead, they were alive, green, and full of sound, birds in the trees, wind in the branches. But beneath that beauty, there was always something wrong. I remembered the silence that fell when I crossed the creek. I remembered the smell of old blood in the soil. I remembered the whispering from the shadows and the voice that told me to play with her in her name. Was Lily, and her eyes were already sewn shut. I had played with her every summer for 3 years. My parents would bring me to this place, this strange forgotten town, and tell me it was a family retreat, something passed down through generations, a place where we could get away from the world. But it wasn't a retreat, it was a trap, a tradition, something old and cruel and meant to feed the roots of this place. And every child who came here was offered to the town in a game of pretend, in a ritual hidden inside stories and songs and nursery rhymes. And I was supposed to be one of them. But I escaped, not by courage, not by strength, but by accident. I had fallen into the river, I had hit my head, and when they pulled me out, I didn't remember anything, not the town, not Lily, not the whispers, and my parents said nothing. They were too afraid, or maybe too bound by whatever oath they had taken, so they left Hollow Creek behind and prayed it would forget me too. But places like this don't forget, they wait, and they reach, and they call you home. The doll blinked, and the man said, "She's awake now." You held her again. And that's the final thread, and the door is open, and the light began to fade, not just in the cabin, but inside my head, like someone had pulled the sun out of the sky and replaced it with a cold, dying bulb. And I stood up and looked around, and the walls of the cabin had changed, now covered in drawings, childlike scrawls of stick figures and trees and rivers and houses burning, and one drawing of a small boy holding hands with a girl with no eyes, and under it was my name written again and again in red crayon. I turned back to ask the man what I was supposed to do, how I could undo this, but the chair was empty, the fire was out, the whole cabin was abandoned like it had been for 100 years, and the doll was gone from my hands. And in its place was a stone, small, smooth, and black, with something carved into it, something that pulsed with heat. And I put it in my pocket and stepped outside, and the world was gone, the forest, the road, the village, all of it replaced by fog thick like smoke, and I could hear footsteps all around me, not one set, but dozens, maybe hundreds, and they circled me slowly like predators, not rushing, just waiting. Then the fog parted, and I saw them, children, dozens of them, standing in a wide ring around me, all dressed in white, all barefoot, all holding dolls, some with missing heads, some burned, some sewn shut eyes. And they all looked at me without blinking, and in unison they spoke, not aloud, but inside my mind. "You left us here, you promised you'd stay, you promised you'd play." And I tried to run, but I couldn't, my legs frozen, my breath caught, my heart thundering like a drum of war. And then she stepped forward, Lily, the first one, the only one I truly remembered, and her skin was pale, now too pale, her lips stitched, her hands shaking, and in her arms was the original doll, the one I had buried beneath the old tree the last summer I was here. And she said without moving her mouth, "You tried to forget, but we remember everything." The earth beneath me cracked and split, and from it rose the house, not the cabin, not the church, but the original house, the one my family used to stay in during those summers, tall and gray and broken like a corpse dragged out of a grave. And the door swung open by itself, and I felt myself pulled toward it like gravity had flipped, like it was no longer the earth that held me, but memory and guilt and old binding magic that had waited too long. The children followed in silence, forming a procession behind me, their feet silent against the soil. And as I crossed the threshold, the house breathed in the walls, expanding the air thick with dust and rot. And the moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, and I was alone again, or I thought I was, until the lights flickered on, and every room, every hallway, every mirror reflected not me, but another version of myself, some younger, some older, all looking back at me with empty eyes and mouths open like they were trying to scream, but had no voice. Then I heard her voice again, not Lily, not the man, but someone older, someone deeper, someone from the foundation of the house itself. And it said, "You should have stayed buried. You were never meant to leave. We gave you to the dark, and the dark does not forgive." I moved through the halls of the old house, each step heavier than the last, like the air itself didn't want me to go further, like the walls remembered what I had forgotten and were whispering to each other in groans and creaks. And I could hear my name being said, not shouted, not screamed, but spoken softly again and again from every room, from every crack in the floorboards, from the dripping pipes, and behind the peeling wallpaper. And I knew that something was waiting for me in the basement. Something old, something patient, something I had once promised, something that now wanted its due. The stairs down were warped and wet, and as I descended I realized they never ended. They just kept going down, level after level, past stone, past soil, past bone and root and memory, until I stepped into a chamber made of black rock with walls that pulsed like a heartbeat. And in the center was a pit, wide and deep and breathing, and standing around it were the children, all of them silent, all of them holding hands, their eyes gone, their mouths stitched, and behind them stood Lily, her body floating slightly off the ground, her face calm, her voice inside my head again. You were the one who got away, and the door never closed. She reached out her hand, and in it was the doll again, its eyes open now, wide and glassy and human, and I knew whose they were, and I didn't want to take it. I wanted to run, I wanted to wake up, but this wasn't sleep, this wasn't a nightmare, this was memory, this was truth, and truth doesn't let go, it waits, it watches, it returns. I asked her, why me, what did I do? And she answered, you promised to play, and when you ran you left the game broken. You left us broken. She stepped forward and placed the doll in my arms again, and I felt it shudder like it had lungs, like it was alive, and I felt something pass into me, something cold and screaming and furious, and the children began to hum a song. I almost remembered a lullaby twisted backwards and full of teeth, and the pit began to glow with a red light, like fire beneath the earth, and I heard the voice again, the one from the house, from the village, from the bones in the creek. You are the last piece of the offering, now the gate can open. And I understood then this place wasn't just haunted, it wasn't just cursed, it was a doorway, it was a seal, and every child who vanished, every scream in the forest, every whisper in the trees was a brick in the wall that kept something worse from breaking through, and I had been chosen not to die, but to hold the lock closed. And when I left, when I forgot, when I lived, the lock cracked, and now it was breaking. Lily stepped back, the children knelt, the chamber shook, and I was lifted off the ground, the doll now fused to my chest, burning into my skin, and I screamed, but no sound came out, just a low vibrating howl like wind through a coffin, and then everything went white. When I woke, I was back in the forest, or something that looked like the forest. The trees were taller, too tall, their branches sharp and black like claws, the sky was red, and the sun didn't move. And I realized I wasn't alone, there were others with me, people I recognized from missing posters, faces I'd seen in old newspaper clippings, children, parents, hikers, travelers, all wandering, all lost. And in each of their eyes I saw the same thing. They were awake, but not free, conscious, but bound, stuck in a loop of memory and guilt and whispers that never stopped. And then I saw a mirror standing in the clearing, tall and silver and framed in bone, and when I looked into it, I saw myself still standing in the basement, holding the doll, unmoving, eyes empty, mouth open, and I understood. I had never left, I was still there, my body was the seal, now my soul the watcher. And this place, this forest, this twisted, hollow version of the real world was the last place I'd ever know, and the voice returned one final time, quieter, now like a satisfied sigh. Thank you for remembering. I wandered that place for what felt like years. Time didn't work there, seasons didn't change, and every so often I would hear a new voice, a new scream, someone else pulled back to Hollow Creek, someone who forgot, someone who was meant to stay. And every time the forest grew darker, the trees grew closer, and the whispers got louder. And now I speak to you not from a dream, not from madness, but from truth. I am not gone, I am still here, watching, waiting. And if you ever hear the wind say your name, if you ever find a doll buried beneath a tree, if you ever wake up and your mirror doesn't show your face, leave, run, burn it all, and never come back. Because Hollow Creek remembers.